There's no doubt that the Mimic is the most controversial character in Five Nights at Freddy's currently. Due to what he is, the follow-up to the ever-popular William Afton, and how he was revealed, a book character getting upgraded into a major game character, it's not much of a shock that there's a lot of split opinions on him. And weirder still, the reception on him seems to be both constantly shifting and staying entirely the same. That is, more appearances, more plot reveals, some minds changed, and yet still a hot-button topic. I myself have had a contentious relationship with the Mimic. I was not impressed with how he was revealed and staunchly against the idea that his story was sold separately in the book series and across numerous books. However, Secret of the Mimic changed my mind significantly, and I began to genuinely like the Mimic. Though that was because Secret of the Mimic kinda did the exact opposite to what Ruin did in regards to showing and telling. But I wouldn't consider myself a Mimic fangirl, more so just someone who's warmed up to him. And I want to start out the video like that, because unlike, say, a Defense of the Puppet video where I would definitely be biased, I do feel like in this case I've seen both sides of the situation regarding the Mimic. And yet, my goal today is to defend the Mimic. And that is M2 the Mimic, not M1 the Mommy Mimic. I'm going to be discussing many of the talking points surrounding the Mimic, his creation, and his story, and playing devil's advocate by spinning them in his favor. In a reasonable way. I'm not just going to say something like, the Mimic's original because he has yellow eyes instead of purple. I'm going to do my best to get this guy off the hook. But this is going to be a little different than when I defended Gregory. See, with Gregory, I had to deconstruct what he did and how he acted, but with the Mimic, it's less what he does and more what he is. Instead, I will be tackling each point of contention with the Mimic as its own thing. So, without further ado, let's begin. Let's start with the first comment I've seen. He's just an upgraded book character. Like I said earlier, I myself have had this issue in the past with books becoming required reading for a character to be understood. And I like reading, I just don't like the idea of having a story broken up to where it becomes necessary. You should get the gist of a character without having to scour and study, yes? But the thing about the Mimic is that it's not exactly fair to levy this criticism against him. And in the Mimic's defense, I'm going to have to bring out a fan favorite who gets a pass for the same thing. Henry Emily. Henry is, by all accounts, a book character who became canon. His first mention and the source of almost everything we know about him comes from the Silver Eye trilogy, a series that Scott said wasn't in the same continuity, but then added a major character from who we know very little about unless we read the books. Details on Henry are extensively guarded, so the books are our only inkling about him. I don't count the movie because he hasn't really had much screen time yet. And unlike Mimic, who had this rectified with a proper introduction and backstory presented in Secret of the Mimic, one that was well-defined and fleshed out, Henry is still a huge enigma. For example, unless I'm wrong, Henry has never been named in the games. Don't believe me? In Pizzeria Simulator, his tape says HRY. That could be Harry. And in Secret of the Mimic, he's referred to as Hen. Definitely Henry, but also I think that goes to show how little the games give us about him. Is Mimic an upgraded book character? Yes. But Fnaf wasn't unfamiliar to those. Henry came from the books. William Afton's name was revealed in the books first. Circus Baby's character progression borrowed from the books version. So it's kind of hard to make that a strike against him when it's happened before and was, by all accounts, welcomed with open arms then. And as for the you have to read the books to understand the Mimic's plot, that was a huge point of contention with me. And the only reason it isn't anymore is because now with Secret of the Mimic and the differences it has from the books, it technically no longer applies. You needed the books to understand Ruin Mimic, but Secret of the Mimic stands on his own. In fact, as the books are so different from Secret of the Mimic, they're entirely separated. So this is one of those issues that was retroactively fixed. Next up, the Mimic has no personality. Now I can see where people are coming from because Mimic's personality is actually pretty hidden until specific moments of Secret of the Mimic. He can very easily come off as just an angry killing machine, and in a way he is, but there's more complexity there at moments. The Mimic isn't just angry, it's bitter and cruel. He keeps tabs and debts and pays them back. After Edwin attacks him, he bides his time, rebuilds himself, and then sets a trap to blow him up. Then throws his words back in his face, showing a degree of sadism that has a root cause. Dispatch is right, the Mimic learned aggression from aggression, but it is this audio log that we realize that the Mimic isn't mindlessly copying cruelty. It knows exactly what it's doing. But also, there's other things too. The Mimic has a surprising amount of borderline goofy and clumsy moments. It falls in Jackie and panics as it does so. It stumbles in Dolly. It skates like a 300-pound chicken with googly eyes. And probably the funniest part is that the Mimic seems to be emulating these characters, but you just know he's not trying to emulate that incompetence. That's just him fumbling around in these suits. And while clumsiness isn't a giant character trait, clumsiness while being the sinister force of nature looking to enact revenge on everyone who wronged him paints an amazing picture. There's also little things that we can't read yet. When the Mimic snatches the data diver box from Arnold and stumbles off, it looks at it and then clutches it closely, protectively, needily, almost like it clutches the tiger doll in the secret ending. Why does he want it? And since he and M1 aren't the same and likely don't have the exact same goals, we know that M1 wants to reprogram M2, but M2's reprogramming seems to be reluctant and unwilling on its part. We don't know why it is that it hugs it. Is he going to try to bring David back himself? We see proto-mimics that likely he tried to build. Is he trying to construct David a new body? Or a new David? Or just someone else? While the theory that the Mimic is trying to remake the Afton family is very prevalent, this here is entirely separated, and it's interesting. It shows some amount of care, a shred of softness, of humanity. The Mimic reminds me, currently, a lot of the Fabrication Machine from 9. Another soulless machine that not only was able to express anger and fear, but whose murderous tirade began when it was ripped away from the only person it knew, its creator, and forced to work non-stop on building war machines. So yes, the Mimic does have a personality, it's just very subtle. And unfortunately, having Ruin come first sold it short, as we didn't get to see much except one moment of true anger and a few bitter jabs that could have come from a different source entirely. Alright, next up, the Mimic is just a copy of William Afton. So there is some merit to this argument because let me tell you, introducing the Mimic with this strange cluster that is Glitchtrap, who is canonically dead while the Mimic is still alive somehow, intertwined him so deeply with William Afton that there is no choice but comparison. It's especially baffling since the Mimic himself, a physical endoskeleton that straight up emulates those it comes in contact with, is really a huge difference from Afton, who the series was trying to move on from, and even Vanny. Having the Mimic's reveal be so muddled up with Burntrap and Glitchtrap and Nexus and Vanessa and Vanny has left a sour taste in a lot of folks' mouths. And it goes to show in his reception. I asked around and looked around, and the most consistent complaint of the Mimic that came up, or what I think was that his introduction did a poor job in introducing what he was. And they're right, because basically Mimic was introduced as a needless clone of Afton, and only now are we seeing him as his sort of threat. We're seeing him as his own thing, and the true potential he had beyond being just another Afton. And I get it, because one of the reasons I was so meh on Mimic originally was because he was basically just Afton, but not Afton. It felt cheap that as soon as Afton was gone, they brought him back, but not really him. It was when Mimic was shown without the Afton skin that he was able to thrive as his own character. But even then, since that's technically in the past, he's still kind of shackled to it. Unless, I don't know, Ruin Mimic is a duplicate and the real M2 Mimic was like repurposed in the sun. He's never escaped being a mom. But even now, we have no idea why Mimic was ever mimicking Afton, why it would have any interest in Afton, and what their connection was. And while we will likely get a game explaining why, I don't necessarily think that it will change those minds when it still results in the same outcome. And you may be thinking right now that since I'm agreeing, I'm holding this against the Mimic, but I'm actually defending the Mimic. Because if we look at the grand scheme, the mimic that was mimicking Afton was kind of a hot mess that resulted from story troubles with Security Breach, Burn Trap, the cuts, etc. Which means that Secret of the Mimic, the game that got, as far as we know, full development time and all its ducks in a row, is the actual mimic that is being sold to us. This is what it's supposed to be. This, not this, winner, loser. So in defense of the mimic, yes, the original introduction set him up to be an Afton clone. But Secret of the Mimic has done a great job in separating them, and I think we should give that credit. Or at least acknowledge that the situation surrounding these story beats wasn't cut and dry. Well, it was cut, but it was also sweaty. As sweaty as Vanny's fursuit, no doubt. And if we aren't going to blame Vanny for how her story was handled, then the Mimic shouldn't be handled that way either. Alright, next on the docket, the Mimic doesn't make any sense. This one seems to be a result of how much information kinda gets mixed together online. The Mimic itself is broken into two variations, the book Mimic and the game Mimic, both of which have similar but very distinct stories. The stories are pretty easy to understand on their own, but often the book and game info gets mixed together, and that's where the confusion comes. Because there are simply some plot lines that don't cohabitate well with each other. For example, in the games, Mimic was originally made to mimic Fiona, while in the books it was mimicking David, who it was hanging out with. But try to fuse those two plot lines together and it becomes hard to follow. And I say this because I have seen some people asking about the Mimic story and then getting both comments describing the book and the game backstories without saying which is which. And yeah, that could get absolutely confusing. And I want to add that it's not as easy as just going on the Wikipedia and reading up about the characters, because sometimes the Wikipedia is inaccurate in certain things. Things like, here's one thing that I can mention that I've seen of quite a few times. Do you remember the story of the Candy Cadet? Or the Candy Cadet stories that he's given out on different occasions? It's never been concretely confirmed who the characters in his stories are. And yet, I have seen often that characters on the wiki have been listed as the characters in these stories, like Cassie is the little boy, Gregory is the little boy, the Mimic is the witch, or Vanny is the witch. And of course, these stories have not been clearly cut and dry who is who. I have suspicions of who is who, but the fact that the wiki has at times had that put down like it is confirmed when it's not, just a little detail like that can make it harder to parse information online. But that's not the only reason the Mimic story may be confusing. Open-ended details like what certain notes may mean, or what was the deal with the radio frequencies in the basement, stuff that does involve a lot of speculation, and trying to add that into the Mimic story, it can be perplexing. But once again, this isn't something that we can blame on the Mimic. This is something that has surrounded Fnaf for a long time. A lot of small details that don't get distinct answers and then become talking points for years to come. And at least in the case of the Mimic, many of those confusing details aren't required for the story. It's not like Midnight Motorist, where we're still trying to figure out exactly what it was trying to tell us. The Mimic story does stand alone without understanding the frequencies, or whatever the Security Breach basement meant. Also, having two Mimics, M1 and M2, was also a choice. But like the two purple men, we can separate these Mimics up. M1 is the one that thinks it's Fiona, M2 is the one running around in melting makeup and high heels. It's way harder to parse in Ruin because we don't know what was going on there, but here it's a lot more explicit. Next up, the Mimic story is dragging. So this is something I've heard about the Fnaf story in general, that it's dragging, and I think it's a matter of perspective. And I think it is both correct and incorrect at the same time. It doesn't actually involve the Mimic as much as it does Fnaf post-Ultimate Custom Night. Remember, the original games had shorter stories and then would jump further in time, while the newer games have stayed pretty close within the time period. Like, for example, Fnaf 1 takes place in the 90s, 2 is a prequel in the 80s, 3 is in the future, 4 is in the past, sister location is complicated, and Pizzeria Simulator takes place at the furthest point past 3, and each of these games involves a completely different location. Help Wanted takes place in a game. Security Breach takes place sometime soon afterwards at the Pizzaplex. Ruin takes place sometime soon afterwards at the Pizzaplex. Help Wanted 2 takes place at a training game under the Pizzaplex somewhere in the same time frame, with Secret of the Mimic taking place in the 70s. I think the reason it feels like the story is slowed down isn't necessarily because of the Mimic, but because, unlike the original series, we've sort of been working through the same time period and location for a while now. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're doing direct continuations that can't really jump 10-20 years, you know? But I think the reason the Mimic story feels like it's dragging is actually because of the book situation. Because if not for the books being the initial reveal of the Mimic's backstory, and for us spending so long on the Mimic, we would have only really got a single game focusing on the Mimic and that backstory. All of it would have been fresh, but since these were concepts first introduced by the books years ago, it's easy to feel like we're spinning wheels, like we've been talking about the same names for ages. And that just, again, boils down to the Mimic's introduction being a little muddled. That's not to be held on the Mimic itself. The Mimic story itself is actually moving at quite a steady pace. Because ignoring Security Breach because we know the backstory of the troubles it had, in Ruin, the Mimic is introduced as a mysterious new character. In Secret of the Mimic, it reveals its backstory in a separate time period. Now, if the next game is Fredbear's Family Diner and that it's strictly about how the Mimic started copying Afton, while that would fill a necessary gap, I could see that feeling like a retread because we would be covering topics we've heard quite a bit about. But again, that would technically only be the Mimic's true, singular, non-Afton related third appearance. But that's that. On to the next and the last one I'm going to cover. Well, kind of. Everything is now the Mimic, or at least, everything could be the Mimic. So here's the thing about this statement. I agree with it, but I don't think it's the Mimic's problem. Oh no. I definitely think that the Mimic is set up where it could be revealed as a major character all along, and it probably will feel like a bit of a cop-out. Like, imagine if it was suddenly revealed that Circus Baby was never Elizabeth Afton and was just the Mimic copying Elizabeth Afton this entire time. Sure, that could work, but beyond the surprise reveal, it would feel a little disappointing. Both because it would put Baby's well-defined character into question, and because it's a reveal that really doesn't do much to change the plot. I've actually flip-flopped on the Mimic being the puppet. Originally I thought it was pretty dumb, but now I could see it if the Mimic was actively possessed by Charlie for maybe a certain amount of time while it was the puppet. It would be goofy, but it would explain some stuff. But as of this time, with Secret of the Mimic being the most recent game, that has not happened yet. The Mimic could be revealed as anyone, but it hasn't. It has had a lot of theories about it being various characters, but unlike Eleanor, a Mimic who was revealed to suddenly be behind everything and being a bunch of characters introduced earlier, in both cases of Mimic mimicking someone and tricking the audience, it's just been sort of fair game for the plot, instead of a big, shattering reveal that would recontextualize a bunch of the games, or a large chunk of the story. There is a loaded chamber that could fire off this plot point at any moment, and once that happens, depending on how it happens, it could be a disaster, but for now, that hasn't happened yet. This also applies to the changing the timeline too much critique, which I have seen folks bringing up as well, but technically Mimic hasn't changed the timeline, and really Edwin hasn't either. We still know Will and Henry ran Fredbear's, we know they likely made Fredbear and Bonnie, Edwin was just a contractor, and we know that William was pulling his stunts for even longer than expected, and his stunts are totally in character. The Mimic's presence alone doesn't change the Fnaf timeline unless he becomes a well-known character, and as of right now, he hasn't yet. This could change, but it hasn't happened yet. Though I don't expect people will be very happy when it's revealed that the crying child is actually the Mimic. And I think that's where we come to an end. So, what have we discovered? Well, the Mimic is a very contentious character, but it's not all by its own doing. It's largely not by what it did in the plot, but instead how the plot handled it. First introductions are extremely important, and unfortunately the Mimic stuck hard. And all this time has been spent trying to peel it off and readjust it just to get the lines out. Plus, how many of these issues with the Mimic aren't solely exclusive to the Mimic? No, sir, I don't think the character itself can be blamed for some of the oopsies along the way, especially when where we're leaving it now is a bit better than where we started. And no, that doesn't mean that the Mimic's introduction into the franchise wasn't a bit of a mess, but it does mean that maybe there's a way to move on from this. And Secret of the Mimic did a lot of heavy lifting with the Mimic's character, story, and scare factor. We got to see it do some cool stuff, whether it's climbing out of molten magma, crawling on the ceiling, being Jackie, it's blown its first appearance out of the water. But that first appearance will always be there, haunting it. And it doesn't help that it got mixed up with was that the Afton return of 21, and the situation with Vanny. In a way, he sort of became the poster boy of the whole rigmarole, even when there were a lot of factors at play. Now, there is one complaint that I didn't tackle with the Mimic, and that's the one about the Mimic not making for a good main villain. Like, the sole above all else main villains of the franchise. And I actually kind of agree with that. I think he's great for what he is, but he would have trouble being the only big bad. Or the one big bad that's pushing around the plot, because considering what the Mimic is, an animatronic that's mimicking things, having him drive the plot sort of requires either someone going after him, or someone having something that for some reason he would need to acquire from them and have some reason to go after them. It can work, but you see what I mean. It's not the same as having, someone like William Afton who had so much power that he could manipulate things behind the scenes. It will be a little harder to get Mimic into the puppeteer role. He can mimic voices, but he doesn't have a dime to his name. But that too, that expectation that he is the big bad has unfortunately let him down. Because if Mimic was simply a Fnaf villain, there wouldn't be so much pressure on him living up to the legend that was Springtrap and William Afton. But since, by all accounts, he seems to be the main villain now, him and M1, that does tip the scales. But again, that isn't Mimic's fault. And that's not saying that the Mimic is actually this great, fantastic character, and that Secret of the Mimic 100% fixed every single issue with them, and there's no reason anyone should be complaining. There's no way it could have. It was only one game, only one appearance. But I will say that we are on the step in the right direction, and right now the one thing holding it back is its past. And the possibility that it may become anyone, but we'll cross that bridge when we burn it. For giggles, and so the video doesn't seem too misleading for someone who is expecting me to defend the Mimic's actions, let me take a swing at that real quick. The Mimic is a creation that was born with one task, taught one thing, and then was savagely attacked for doing so. It's no wonder that it lashed out at Edwin. Sure, it was overkill, but think of it as if it truly did believe it was David. Dad, who ignores him all the time, just beat the stuffing out of him and broke both of his legs, and then abandoned him. Was he justified in killing Edwin? No, but it wasn't like an unprovoked attack. It did learn off of him, almost like a child would. And as for it attacking the Fazbear Entertainment workers, it actually has a pretty good self-defense case. Sure, they're just doing their job, but they're working for Fazbear Entertainment, who is in this era directly under William Afton. You know, the man who kills kids for fun, and look what he did to the fun times. He practically tortured them. Because unlike the workers, Afton is very aware of what he's doing and how much these creations can feel. He wouldn't be having so much joy if he didn't. If he got a hold of Mimic, it wouldn't just be a sense of him shutting it down and then duplicating it. Oh no, he would be putting that thing through the ringer. He would drag that thing downstairs to his strange bedroom underground prison and start throwing other animatronics at it left and right. And if this is a situation where the Mimic does think it's a child at that point, let's say if William Afton got a hold of the Mimic after it was programmed to believe it was David, that would be ruthless for that little guy. And William Afton would take the utmost thrill in it, because the Mimic is a toy that won't die. It might think it's a child, it might act like a child, if set up the right way, but it will not die. So he can do he can use it as a test dummy. And then he takes whatever he makes from it, and he just throws it out into the wild and waits until it catches kids. In fact, I might unintentionally be padding the crying child as the mimic theory with that one. But I digress. Point is, the mimic was basically fighting off a horde that kept coming back to his house, breaking down his door, and trying to drag him and his precious blueprints off. Blueprints that he didn't even have access to. Here he is building microwaves and trash cans in the basement, and the people who ruined their business are trying to steal his makeup. That's no good. It's a matter of personal identity against the unrelenting, overwhelming, all-consuming force known as Fazbear Entertainment. And heck, maybe I was wrong earlier about how aware I believe it was of its actions. Maybe its stuffing the bodies was to hide them out of the way, not as a sinister ritual, but because it was the quickest way out of sight and out of mind. Maybe the mimic is, at its core, childish in some ways. Maybe it doesn't understand things like humans do. And if that's the case, it's hard to judge him with the same perimeters. It reminds me of Caine from The Amazing Digital Circus, spoiler alert, but in the last episode, the most recent episode, not the one coming out in a couple of weeks, they basically outed that Caine's been tinkering with the minds of the humans trapped in the circus. And while this would normally be a horrendously vile act, this is an AI doing it. Tampering like this would seem normal to something that, by its own creation, is regularly tampered with to function properly. Not saying Caine isn't playing God, but I am saying that we can't levy human reasoning on something that, at its core, isn't human. In case you can still hear me over the rain. And we don't know how human the mimic is, so in that way, that's a bit of a defense. But I think I've gone on long enough here, and by now I think I made a pretty good case for why the mimic isn't so bad. I don't expect it to change any minds. I'm kinda shocked my mind changed with Secret of the Mimic, honestly. But hopefully I've given you another angle to look at this goofy thing from. Or at the very least, I gave you a very vivid mental image of Mimic drunkenly skating around and a sweaty Vanny. It was worth it. Thank you for watching.